This is Dylan Moore with I Read It TV. I've got an intellectual self-defense / political conversation for today that revolves around RFK and stabbies. I don't really want to talk about stabbies. I'm talking more about intellectual self-defense and people who pretend to be smarter than you to try to humiliate you and how to deal with them. And in this case, there was this X video that came across my feed about RFK having this conversation that I thought would be very, very both pertinent in the sense of the topic that he's actually talking about, which is, of course, vaccines, but also a very good intellectual self-defense topic, because I have spoken to a number of people who, and these are typically people who don't have any sort of college education, who often feel inferior or less than or unable to speak, or I should maybe not unable, but unworthy to speak in the presence of someone who does have that formal education, because they, I mean, for lack of a better term, they fear the title. I want to talk about how to, figuring out how to stop fearing the title. You got to figure that out on your own, but a strategy for how to tackle someone who's attempting to use that title and flash it in front of you to basically get you to shut up without an argument. They don't have an argument, but they still want you to shut up because they just go, I know better than you because I have the title and I have the training and I have the education and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So let's look at this video of an experience that RFK had, apparently with a guy named Paul Offit. I don't know who that is or was before I ran into this, but RFK will explain. Let's listen.
And every one of them told me one thing: you need to talk to Paul Offit.
Just loud enough.
This, to me, was a huge signal, because I looked up Paul Offit and I realized he was a vaccine maker. And, you know, as brazen and as captured as the EPA and the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York are, none of them would ever tell me if I had a question about a coal permit, go talk to a coal lobbyist, right? But they all told me, go talk to this industry guy because we don't know what's happening.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation, right? The coal, like if I had a coal question, nobody in the government would ever tell me to go talk to the coal lobbyist, but for some reason in vaccine / healthcare, they go and tell them to talk to the vaccine or healthcare lobbyist, because apparently that person is so amazing and so knowledgeable that we don't even know how to talk about it, so we just defer to him. That's not a recipe for disaster, but that's not the topic of the show today. I just wanted to put that comment in.
So I called Paul Offit on the phone, and he answered, and he was very charming. And he told me he was happy to talk to me because he had gotten into public health because he was inspired by my father. And so, you know, I'm susceptible to that kind of flattery, and I was inclined to, you know, to like the guy and to believe him. And then I started asking him questions. And I asked him a really simple question, which is, how can CDC tell pregnant women not to eat tuna fish and recommend to those same pregnant women that they get flu shots that are loaded with mercury? At that time, virtually every flu shot, all 95% of the flu shots had bolus doses of mercury, 25 micrograms. And
then just in case anybody's somehow not familiar with the tuna fish thing, tuna fish are large fish that eat other fish and then build up a bunch of mercury in their bodies, and so pregnant women should be careful eating tuna fish because they could expose themselves to a level of mercury that they shouldn't otherwise have. And so the CDC on one hand is saying you shouldn't eat tuna fish because you can get the mercury, but on the same time you should take these flu shots which have the mercury. This is the question he's laying out to Paul Offit, and we're going to hear the answer.
he said, well, he said, here's the thing, Bobby. And, you know, a kind of patronizing way, I could hear that.
In kind of a patronizing way. That's the first thing I want to get to. In kind of a patronizing way. You ask a totally legitimate question to somebody. Hey, wait a minute. Wait. I'm So on one hand, you told me don't eat the mercury, but on the other hand, you told me to shoot to put the mercury in a shot. I'm kind of confused. Can you help me square the circle? And that's, I mean, there may be a good answer to that, and it's going to sound like he comes up with a good answer. There may be a good answer to that, but that is a legitimate question. And if somebody turns around and starts being patronizing, that is the first red flag. I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know if it's a red flag. That's really not giving enough credit. If you ask a question like that and they turn around to be patronizing, that's pretty much a full poof, punch in the nose. But let's get through this and I'll break it all down.
There are different kinds of mercury. There's a good mercury and a bad mercury. And I knew, because I've been suing people on mercury, when you're suing people, you get a PhD in it. You're so scared. And
I don't know what you mean by you're so scared.
And I knew that his argument was now not with me, it was with the periodic tables, because there is no such thing as good mercury.
Yeah, I want to hear what good mercury is.
He said to me, I said, okay, can you explain that? And he said, well, the methylmercury in fish stays in your body for long periods and it does a lot of damage. But the ethylmercury in vaccines is excreted immediately. Now,
strong claim. And now, as you can see, I was talking about someone with a title, someone with professional expertise. What RFK just got hit with was technical language, right? So even when they were in the realm of, okay, well, let me ask about the tuna fish and the shots, and okay, well, there's good mercury and there's bad mercury, we're still in kind of colloquial layman's terms, but as soon as he goes methylmercury and ethylmercury, we've now gotten to a level where, unless you've taken some level of organic chemistry, you don't even know what that means. Right? And just so you know, a methyl group is just a carbon with 3 hydrogens attached to it, and an ethyl group would be 2 carbons surrounded by hydrogens, so 2 carbons around the first one and 3 around the last one. And not that you really need to know that, but the point that I want to make is chemically, these are very, very they would exhibit very, very similar properties. However, biochemically, tiny itty bitty changes in chemical structure can have radically different implications inside the body. So the point that I want to make here is that someone, let's say this Paul Offit guy who has the chemical knowledge and the biochemical knowledge and the biochemical experience, to someone who doesn't have that biochemical knowledge and biochemical experience, is putting forward real information that is now leaving the bounds of what the other person supposedly can understand. It's an important step here.
I knew by then that the industry had been saying that since Eli Lilly entered the market with thimerosal in 1932. I also knew they had no scientific study that showed that. However, in 2003, a CDC scientist named Picciero did a study that seemed to confirm that 70-year-old canard. He looked at mercury that in the blood, the ethylmercury in the blood of children who had been vaccinated with thimerosal vaccine, and the mercury was gone within a week. And then he looked at children who had eaten a tuna fish sandwich, and the methylmercury was there 64 days later. So they all breathed a collective sigh of relief, and they said, look, we were right all along. That wild guess we made was actually correct.
Now, this is a perfect example to put in your repertoire for dealing with someone who is going down a scientific argument, right? Is that one study like that? Hey, we tested, the kids with the tuna fish, tested the kid with the kids with the vaccines. We found this and this. Okay, done. We got the answer. Science never works like that. It never, ever, ever, ever works like that. You got to test over and over and look at it this way and look at it that way and check for, okay, did we have any sloppiness in our lab technique? Did we make any errors? Have we made any false presumptions? Have we failed to control for all variables? Were there issues with the instrumentation that we had? Like, yes, we got very precise results, but were they accurate? Well, we got very accurate results, but were they precise? I mean, like, to just say, okay, we kind of did this study that seemed to show that the ethyl mercury was gone and the methyl mercury was there, and you say done. That, I mean, again, this is it's kind of a shiny thing you can dangle in front of somebody's face and say, "Oh, look, we got the answer." But it's effectively word salad. I'm going to explain later why this is word salad, but let's finish.
It leaves immediately. But NIA, Boyd Haley, who some of you know, the chair of the chemistry department at the University of Kentucky, who's the world's expert on mercury toxicity, wrote a letter to Pediatrics which published Pichiero's study. And he said, wait a minute, what happened to the mercury?
Good question.
Pichiero didn't find it in the kids' sweat, their fingernails, their feces, their urine, or their hair. He said, where is it?
To be clear, with the ethyl mercury, this guy's asking, okay, it went into the body through the vaccines, and then it's gone within a week. It had to have come out somewhere. Like, did they spit it out? Did they poop it out? Did they pee it out? Did they get their fingernails or hair? Like, where did it come out? And they can't find it anymore. So, again, that's this, hey, we did this, here's the tuna fish kids, here are the vaccine kids, and we figured out the methylmercury's bad, the methylmercury's good, we're done. No, you gotta keep probing and asking questions.
And Pichiero had looked. And so NIH then funded a series of studies to figure out what was happening, because at that time they didn't know. And people were still doing real science, and they funded a very famous scientist out at the University of Washington, and he did a macaque study. So he did the same thing that they were doing to the kids. He gave the mercury to the macaques with tuna fish sandwiches, and then he gave vaccine mercury to another group of macaques, and he found the same thing. The ethyl mercury from the vaccines was gone in a week. The methyl mercury was in their blood 2 months later. But then he sacrificed the macaques, which means he killed them, and he did a postmortem, and he found the mercury, and it was in their brains. The reason it disappeared was not because it was being excreted from their bodies. It disappeared because it crossed the blood-brain barrier much more easily than methylmercury. And as soon as it went to their brains, it metabolized into organic mercury, which is the most toxic form, and then it stayed there forever. We now know, 27 years later, you can still find it in the brains. And there's ways of chelating it out, which a lot of you who are parents have done with your kids, and a lot of you have probably seen really good results, as Lynn Redwood did. But it's still there. So I said to Paul Offit, I said to him, what makes you think that it's excreted? And he said, well, there's a study by Pichiero. And I said to him, well, what about the Burbacker study? And there was dead silence. And I could tell that nobody had ever pushed back on him who had a knowledge.
Nobody ever pushed back on him. Now, in this case, this is more specific. This is someone who had RFK in this case has industry knowledge to be able to push back. But and the general example I'm going to pull here is if you don't have that knowledge, right? But in this situation, nobody ever pushed back against the guy. They just ate up his credentials.
Any kind of was conversant at all with science. And then he said, well, you're right, Bobby. And he said, it's not that single study, it's an entire mosaic of studies. This is a quote. And I said, can you give me a citation? And he said, I'll get it to you. And that's the last I ever heard of him. And, I'm hoping at some point I get to depose him. But at that point,
he did end with word salad. Did you hear that? Oh, it's a mosaic of studies. What does that mean? Are you like, it's a beautiful group of studies just laid out on a wall that creates a beautiful pit. I mean, like, clearly the guy was grasping for word salad and emotional language when he said that.
At that point, I knew that the public health authorities either didn't know, probably didn't know, and they probably didn't want to know. They were probably purposefully ignorant of what was happening, and that and that Offutt was lying.
So let me switch back over to here. So in this case, I mean, we can make a whole nother video about vaccines and mercury and all that sort of stuff. But like I said, this is about intellectual self-defense, about somebody who pushed back against a person who had forever just sat on his own credentials and used that to instill the fear of God into everybody. But like he said, RFK said right at the beginning, all the government people went to this Paul Offit guy because nobody understood what was going on. And I mean, I understand, chemistry is difficult and really doing science is difficult, but that situation wasn't that difficult, right? Bobby Kennedy to say, hey, wait a minute, where would the ethyl mercury be going then? Right? If it's not getting excreted anywhere, where would it be going? So what I want to segue from here is to utilize this example and to help people realize that more often than not, when someone with a PhD or even a bachelor's degree or whatever, someone who's got this hoity-toity title, who supposedly knows all this sorts of stuff about everything, not everything, but a certain topic, you get in a conversation with with the person regarding that topic, and here's how you can test whether or not they're BSing you. Because that person can know a lot about that topic and BS you. They could fake knowing about that topic and BS you. The trick is the fact that you don't have the expertise in that topic makes it so you cannot tell, okay, is this sentence BS or is this sentence accurate? Right? And supposedly the person who has the title, who has the experience, who is able to utilize the vocabulary, is knowledgeable of that, right? And the way I approach this, and this is the way that I recommend approaching this, is that there's a way to challenge people like this, to call them out without knowing anything about the topic. You have to know zero about the topic. And the hinge point that you would notice, like if I mean, I majored in chemistry, so I could have that conversation that RFK had with this Paul Offit guy. But let's say I didn't. Let's say I didn't know anything about chemistry. Is if I brought up the single, like well, got kids with the tuna fish, and the kids with the mercury, but where the mercury done gone? Right? If I was like that, I could still take this guy on. And the indicator was right at the beginning when the guy said that, or when RFK said that. How did he describe it? He became Paul Offit became condescending to him. That wasn't the word that RFK said, but it's essentially what he got across. Is Paul Offit became condescending to him. At that point, instantaneously, you should know discussion has stopped. Reasoning has stopped. Like full like brick wall, boom, reasoning has stopped. Now, it doesn't mean it can't start up again, but for that moment, reasoning has stopped. And so if someone ever does that to you, like you're trying to have an understanding about the situation, maybe you're dumb, maybe you're asking a dumb question and you don't even know it, right? Now, this is different from intentionally asking a dumb question or trying to pick a fight, but you're trying to legitimately figure out, and if the person is condescending, if you want to really jump the gun, you need to say, stop. I now know I can't trust what you're about to tell me because you have just spoken to me condescendingly, which is to make me feel stupid about the question that I'm asking. So if you really think that I'm too stupid to understand this, I need you to tell me. Otherwise, stop being condescending with me. Or something to that effect, right? But if you don't jump on it right there and then, my opinion is that if somebody is very, very skilled, very, very knowledgeable in a subject. They should also have possessed the skill to be able to dumb it down to the person in front of them who does not have knowledge of the subject, right? I mean, take the methyl mercury, for example. I could do it right here, right now. I explained it using the terminology earlier. I'm gonna dumb it down right now. So methyl mercury, you got a mercury ion. I shouldn't even use the word ion. You got a mercury atom. Forget the ion. That has to do with charge. Forget that. And you've got a little chunk connected to it. At least one. I don't even know if it's more than one. Doesn't matter for the sake of this argument. You got this little chunk connected to it. But that's made out of something else, and that something else is called carbon. The ethyl mercury, it's almost the same thing, but that chunk is just a little bit bigger. Now, based on the how big that is, even though it's made out of the same thing, can actually have pretty big implications on what's going on in your body, because depending on how big that chunk is can actually change the way that it goes through fats or cell walls or semi-permeable membranes or the blood-brain barrier, for example, right? So without, if you're listening to this, maybe you don't have any knowledge of chemistry, was I successfully able to communicate the idea over to you, right? Without bogging you down into any dense scientific terminology, right? If you're skilled at a subject, you should be able to skillfully attenuate it to the person's understanding. I mean, obviously, there's within the limits, right? If you got a 50 IQ retard, obviously, that there's only so far you can go. But you see what I'm saying, right? If you have someone who's reasonably intelligent to ask a reasonably intelligent question, typically you should be able to put it at their level. Or, I mean, there is a chance that the subject that you're discussing is so technically complex where you're just like, dude, there's no way. I'm sorry. I don't know how to dumb this down because it's so difficult. It's so complex that I just don't know how to do it. I'm sorry. I'm not even going to try. If a person answers in one of those two, I would say there's a good chance that they're being honest with you. That they're being reasonable with you. They're being rational with you. However, if that person jumps up into nomenclature mode, jumps up into technical language mode, and starts talking up here at a level that they know that you don't understand, you must assume they are using word salad. Dylan, what's word salad? It's the mosaic of studies or whatever that Paul Offit supposedly said to RFK, which is you're just using big words that don't really have any meaning in order to not make an argument, but to make it sound like you're making an intelligent argument, so the other person backs off because they're like, wow, this guy's using really big words. I don't really know how to respond to this. He must be really smart because he's using such big words. What I'm saying here is if somebody jumps into that technical language without making any attempt to be like, hey, are you following along with this? I know, up in technical field, let me know if I need to dumb this down so I can relate to you. If they're not doing that, you have to assume that they're using word salad, even if they aren't, right? Even if like everything they're saying is true, you have to assume that it's word salad, because if they really wanted to communicate it to you, they would do what I just said. They would either attempt to bring it down to your level or just flat out admit like, hey, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm incapable of bringing it down to your level. It's too complicated, or I'm too poor of a communicator. I'm sorry. So the way that you crack someone like this is you call out that exactly. I mean, just bluntly say it like, look, dude, stop. I can't understand what you're saying. I know you know that I can't understand what you're saying. So I don't know why you're saying it. Are you able to bring this down to my level? Now, it flips back to what I said. If they are, or if they are, they'll do it. If they're not, they should be able to admit that. But if they get condescending, if they start talking down to you, if they start being passive aggressive, if they start getting sarcastic, you got them. You got them. And just repeat it. Hey, I don't think you're actually being honest with me here. I think you're attempting to manipulate me because I asked you to dumb it down for me. And now you've gotten hostile with me. You've gotten passive aggressive. You've gotten whatever. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? And now the conversation stops being about, whatever the question is that you asked and whatever the answer was supposed to be, or that. The question now revolves around whether or not the person is attempting to manipulate you or attempting to dominate you. I've refrained from a lot of this intellectual self-defense language that I typically use. If you watch my presentations on my 3-part series on intellectual self-defense, which will be in the links below, but it breaks down. In those presentations, I break down much more exactly how these interactions work. But for the sake of this, you just need to understand there's a reasonable sphere and there's a manipulative sphere. And if you stay in the reasonable sphere, the person and the other person is in the manipulative sphere, they just dominate you. You just lose, right? So if you could call the person out for word salad, again, don't worry about whether or not it is. For you, it functionally is, because the person is not attempting to bring it down to your level. And if you bring that up to them, I mean, you can be polite about it. I always like to be polite first. You can be polite about it. But again, if they turn around and they're hostile, passive aggressive, they start talking down to you, they condescend, whatever. You're not in a conversation. You are now in a fight. So treat it accordingly, right? I mean, you don't have to come out guns blazing, although you can, and sometimes that's fun. You don't have to come out all guns blazing, but just to let the person know, like, look, I understand we're not having a conversation, and you are not making a good faith effort in order to elucidate my understanding here. I don't believe you. Like, whatever you're saying, I don't believe you. And that, it allows you to call out the, in quotes, PhD without having any knowledge on the subject. Because now it puts them on the defensive. They're having to explain themselves. And if they really know the material, they should be able to do one of the two things I just said. If not, you can keep backing them up and, make yourself, you are now the expert in the room at identifying when someone is bullshitting, right? So that's all. I just wanted to have a nice intellectual self-defense video here. If you're really interested in learning more about intellectual self-defense, I can't recommend enough my 3-part series on intellectual self-defense, the 4 circuits, the line of reason, and the chain of responsibility. Links will be below, and check them out. And in this case, for this video, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Dylan Moore at irita.tv. If everybody who's watching this now or recording could like, share, and subscribe it helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it's just true.